All right, so we're going to enter into Unit 3, which deals heavily with the cell, different parts of the cell, functions of cell organelles, different types of cells. So it's going to be a long unit. We'll split it up into two separate tests. But the first couple learning targets that we'll talk about is the cell theory. We'll talk about what a cell is. We'll talk about important individuals which contributed to the cell theory, and we'll talk about the cell theory itself. All right, so we'll start off with the history of the cell, and then we'll talk about some individuals and highlight some individuals and what they contributed to the cell theory. So just a reminder, and we've talked about this back in Unit 1, the cells are the smallest unit of life in all living organisms. All living things are composed of at least one complete cell. That may be a prokaryotic cell, which is a very simple cell, but it is still one cell. So the first person is Robert Hooke. He was the first to observe cells, and he observed the cells in cork, and he's the one that created the term cells because they look like cells in honeycomb. So if you look here at the right, if you see my mouse, this is what he saw. Okay, it's a representation of what he saw, and you could see the little cells. And if you know what honeycomb is, or the inside of a beehive, then you know what he was talking about. So Robert Hooke coined the term cells, and he was also the first to observe cells, but they weren't living cells. They were dead cells in cork. Next is Anton von Leeuwenhoek, and he was the first to observe living cells. He observed single-celled organisms or one-celled organisms like protozoa, as well as human red blood cells. Excuse the bell. Next is Matthias Schleiden, and he made a claim that all plants were composed of cells. After that is Theodore Swan. He claimed that all animals are composed of cells. Next is Rudolf Virchow. He claimed that all cells came from or come from pre-existing cells. So, with all that being known and being said and being pointed out, the cell theory is as simple as the bullets here. All living things are composed of cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things, and new cells are produced from pre-existing cells. Characteristics of all cells. So all cells, regardless of whether they're prokaryotes or eukaryotes or plant cells, animal cells, doesn't matter. They all share three characteristics. Characteristic number one is they all have a plasma membrane. Okay, so this surrounds the cell and provides not only protection but also regulation of materials in and out of the cell. Second characteristic is cytoplasm, which is made of cytosol. That's a gel-like fluid. This is where you can find organelles. And some cells only have a few organelles. Some cells have a lot, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And the third characteristic is genetic material. All cells contain DNA. In this course, of course, we've talked about it contains the information to code for proteins, which gives the cell life, so to speak. So the first type of cell is prokaryotic cells, and break down the word and what it means. So pro means before, and kairon means nucleus. So these cells evolved before the nucleus. These are very simple cells. They don't have a lot of membrane-bound organelles. They don't have a nucleus. Typically, these are your single-celled organisms like protozoa, amoeba, those type of things. So some characteristics, and some we've already talked about: no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles, have a single circular chromosome, and these cells are typically smaller and less complex. The best example of these is bacteria. The other type of cells is eukaryotic cells, and if we break that word down, U means true, and kairon again means nucleus. So these cells evolved after prokaryotes. Okay, these cells have a true nucleus which houses the DNA or genetic material. This leads us into the endosymbiosis theory. This is the theory that eukaryotes arose from prokaryotes, and it explains, or it's a theory that explains the origin of the mitochondria and the chloroplast. And we'll talk about those in the next learning target. But both the mitochondria and the chloroplast have their own plasma membranes, and they also have some of their own genetic material. So the endosymbiosis theory is this idea that eukaryotic cells engulfed smaller prokaryotic cells and incorporated them to do a particular job within the cell. So some characteristics of eukaryotes. They have a nucleus which contains the cell's DNA. They have many specialized membrane-bound organelles. Typically, most of them are found in the endomembrane system. We'll talk about that in the next video. They have multiple linear chromosomes. They can vary in size, and they are typically extremely complex. The best example of these are plant and animal cells. Oops, sorry, clicked one too fast. Animal cells. Animal cells have a few unique characteristics that plant cells do not. They have centrioles. Sometimes they have cilia or flagella, which they'll use for movement, and they have lysosomes. Plant cells, some unique characteristics of plant cells is they have cell walls, they have a large central vacuole, and they also have chloroplast. And that is the end of learning targets 1 and 2. Be sure you complete the video form that goes with this, and if you have questions, let me know. Thank you.